All right, we're back. We're live. What's up, everybody? This is the second episode for the day. My name is Sunny Ray. This is the Sunny Ray Show. Today, I have one of my favorite guests for the year for sure. This is going to be part two. His name is Brian Lenihan, a fellow Canadian, a fellow Ontarian, and he is the founder and chair of the Quantum Strategy Institute. And most recently, he did a TEDx talk. So he's also a TEDx speaker. He's the author of Quantum Boost and Quantum Excellence. And he's top 50 rising in technology. And so he's a really, really interesting guy. I'm going to bring on Brian. This will be part two. Brian, how you doing?
Doing great, Sonny. How are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic. I'm super excited. As usual, talk to you. This is always an honor. So Brian, I know we did have an interview before. I'm going to link to that and whatnot. But since we last spoke, when we recorded part one, like where was quantum on your kind of like hype versus reality curve, and where is it now? Has it moved much?
So I guess it continues to move in the right direction, which is what I'm thrilled about. One of the things that I believe in is iterative progress. There are very few sort of chat GPT moments in the quantum space, more of, sort of incremental movements in the right direction. So even when we spoke May 15th, in the last few weeks, we've seen improvements in error correction and lots more investment going in, lots more talk about IPOs and SPACs on the investment side just in the last 3 weeks. So we're really seeing that, continued focus inside the lab and inside the investment community.
I love that. That's great. So your 2025 quantum look back. Actually, before we even get into that, let's talk about your TEDx talk. How did that go? Are you allowed to talk about it, or should we keep it on the down low?
Yeah, no, love to promote that. I mean, the TEDx team was
Okay.
amazing. And it was a TEDx talk that I did at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, Ontario. And what was great about that was that a good portion of the audience were computer science students, masters of computer science, with a very great interest in what was going to happen in technology. And my presentation was titled "When One Door Closes," the transition from AI to quantum. And you might kind of ask yourself, what does that mean? Well, from my perspective, I see a lot in the public media and social media about large organizations taking entry-level jobs and disposing of them because AI can do the same function 24/7 for less cost and more accurately and cleaner. And so you get a lot of these younger people who are looking for jobs coming out of universities or colleges, hoping to code and program. And I'm sure, as many of your other guests on your program have talked about, those jobs are going away because coding is a very simple task for an AI. It doesn't mean that there are great creative approaches for AI. One of the big challenges that companies are seeing is that, sure, you can do what's trained in the past, but AI doesn't do very well in terms of the look forward or being creative, at least not yet. So the number of opportunities that are available diminish for a lot of these entry-level people who are even having like a master's of computing science role. So what I was trying to do is introduce them to the world of quantum. The Quantum Insider, which is really sort of the industry source for information, did a projection last December and said that by 2035, there'll be 840,000 new jobs in the quantum sphere of all different kinds, not just PhDs or physicists or computer programmers. And so what I was trying to do was encourage or inspire some of these young people to start thinking about quantum.
I love that. I know you got me definitely thinking more about it, and I like how you're not very threatening, which I think is really comforting, right? I think the word quantum brings a lot of just fear and doubt, and it's like
Mhm.
just scary at times, yet it's like probably the most beautiful thing ever, right? But I like how you're just putting like a nice approachable polish to it. So your 2025 quantum, look back flagged logical qubits, right? So
Mhm.
PQC urgency and geopolitical shifts as kind of the year's big stories. So, which one surprised you most and why?
I think the one that surprised me most is around logical qubits. So just to recap, if you're using a classical computer today, that's based on ones and zeros. So it's either on or off, very linear approach to understanding how you can convert your data into ones and zeros. Very linear. In a quantum computer, you're using qubits, these particles or atoms that are entangled at any distance. They can be one or zero or both until you actually measure it. But what this does is it allows you to use qubits for the most complex types of problems, the most intractable kinds of problems. If you're thinking going forward and you're thinking about what a combination, a hybrid combination that an organization might use in the future, let's call it 90% classical and 10% quantum, you'll need both. But in a quantum environment, you're talking about using this for the hardest problems. Again, maybe I can also position it in saying that if you have large data sets and simpler problems, you use a classical system. If you've got smaller data sets but very complex, lots of factors, then that's ideally suited for a quantum computer. What's happened since I wrote that article has been substantial breakthroughs in something called error correction. These qubits are very fragile. They don't last a long time. And so in order for them to be longer sustaining, they need a group called physical qubits that sort of wrap around the logical qubits. What's been happening is companies have been really amping up their capabilities on error correction. So getting rid of the sort of the errors that go along with these fragile qubits. And what that means is it takes a lot less of them to do the same function. And what's the point of that? Well, that means you can start scaling. It means you can start really getting into a commercial environment for a quantum computer. So since that article that I wrote for 2025, that's really surprised me the most.
Is so big, right? And even AI, like I did electrical engineering 25 years ago. We had,
Mhm.
we were studying control systems and artificial intelligence and all this stuff back then. And it felt the same way quantum feels, right? For most
Mhm.
people, which is it's incremental, it's just taking place in a lab, it has nothing to do with me. And will it? Who knows? It's more relegated to Hollywood and
Yeah.
sci-fi. But now what you're saying is that wow, like that might be the first time I've ever heard that quantum's at least inching towards commercialization, because it always again felt like 10-20 years away, which means eternity. so
Yeah.
um so I was going to ask you, so you watched the HSBC to Santander and JP Morgan move from talk to pilots on
Mhm.
option pricing and fraud detection. So what separates the banks getting real value from the ones doing, I don't know, quantum theater?
Yeah. So a perfect example is if you are trying to create a portfolio of investments that represents real life. That is a very difficult thing to do. You'd say to yourself, well, why is that so difficult? Well, if you're HSB or Santander and you're looking to create that portfolio, you only can include maybe 20 factors in that calculation. Um, if you start going above that, it becomes exponentially more and more difficult to create a portfolio that looks like real life. And what I mean by that is, maybe you're including interest rates and world debt levels and, individual performance, but maybe it doesn't include, 100 other things that are happening to impact that portfolio. So those organizations, those banks, ideally suited for this most difficult problem to create a portfolio that is much more resembling of reality. And so they're starting to use quantum technologies to do comparisons. So what's the comparison going to tell them? It's going to tell them, do they get better output from the quantum computer, or does it take less energy to do the calculation, which can be very important, right? Is it easier to scale their calculation using a quantum computer. It's not just simply faster. It's all those other things that they need to consider as to whether they should shift some of their calculations over when they actually have a fully functioning quantum computer.
So quantum as a service from IBM, AWS, and Microsoft pushed,
Mhm.
industry revenue past $1 billion. Like
Yeah.
that's genuine adoption, or, cloud vendors monetizing curiosity. Like which one is that? Is it, you know what I mean? Is it actually solving business problems out there at scale, or is it still more like serving more like a curiosity for businesses?
So in 2026, I'd say it's the latter. It's probably more, you're doing the comparison, because if you remember, um, if you think about a classical system and its accuracy level, um, it is 99 and 13 nines following that. 99, overall 15 nines in terms of accuracy, which is amazing. People don't think about accuracy in terms of classical computers anymore. The best quantum computer is 99.99% accurate. And you might think that's very accurate. But when you start talking about trillions of transactions, that 0.001% becomes meaningful. So it's very important that quantum computers get to the point where they're as accurate, or clearly accurate, in comparison to a classical or a supercomputer. Companies and organizations aren't simply shifting over. They're saying, prove it. They're saying, show me that these systems can really do this. One of the things that really encourages me is because there's three pillars of quantum technology. Computing is one, but sensing and communications are the other two. And so today, if you're saying to yourself, come on, do quantum technologies really work? Do the underlying physics really make sense? They actually do. So if you're a pilot and you're flying over a very difficult zone, a challenging zone, and your GPS gets jammed, you have no idea where you are from the GPS perspective. But if you have a quantum sensor, you don't have that problem. It can't be jammed. The military is using quantum sensors today. And so when they're flying over difficult military zones, they don't have that same challenge of GPS. So if you're looking at it from a business perspective and you're saying, come on, Brian, is this hype? Is this really going to happen? The underlying technology is already proven to work. Now it's just a question of how do you integrate that at scale in a quantum computing environment?
So interesting. And NVIDIA's quantum push and its like national lab partnerships jumped from a handful to 35 plus. So how much is real capability versus narrative gravity around one company?
Um, So what's great about that is NVIDIA made a significant change in 2025. They were less interested at the very beginning of 2025, and then Jensen Huang changed his opinion on that back in April of 2025. And they've made significant investments. Being the world's largest capitalization company, clearly they gain a lot of attention. But what's also happening is you've got companies like Quantinuum who've recently done an IPO, 1.68 billion, big numbers. And this is really just the beginning when, they're continuing at this level of maturity. Same thing with Inflection doing a SPAC, and other companies looking to do more public offerings. So we're seeing investors say, yep, I believe that technology is going to be effective. It may be at an immature stage, but I believe it. And so NVIDIA just happens to be the largest profile. And what we're also seeing is companies like IBM and their QuizKit offering, seeing hundreds of thousands of new subscribers who are call it playing around on their system so that they can start to learn the capabilities required. And I guess I'd take it one step further, is that there are companies that are introducing translators that don't require you to really understand quantum algorithms. they do the conversion for you. So we're seeing those kind of iterative steps, both of the big scale and some of the smaller scale.
Yeah, it'll be interesting once, quantum starts underpinning AI and oh my God, we can start doing
Mhm.
research and
Yeah.
uh I can't wait. So well, I guess what's a prediction you made in part one that you'd now revise and what changed your mind? I guess you kind of touched on one of them, which is this idea that quantum is inching towards commercialization, right? That's quite profound. Any other big insights over the last couple weeks?
Um, I think probably not what you'd expect, but from a talent perspective, one of the things that I was looking at when I did the TED Talk was to introduce the concept that there are going to be these opportunities, quantum jobs, not only distant future, but in the near future. But the more I research this, the more I find that there's a significant imbalance between the number of people who are available to do the jobs and the number of jobs that are in the marketplace today looking for people. And so, your audience obviously has a high tech background. Loved watching your previous episodes. But what we see is this this intense global focus on AI, and it makes sense. There's so much going on in the AI community, whether it's generative or agentic or whatever in the future. But we're seeing a massive divide between the available supply of talent and this more significant demand for it. So this really highlighted itself to me post the TED Talk.
So for a leader who tuned out quantum this last year because it felt too far off, what's the single most important thing that they missed?
Um, so what I think they've missed is the timetable. And the reason why I say that is because organizations don't turn on a dime. They take years to do transformations. And if you listen to Google, they're looking at 2029 for a fault-tolerant quantum computer. We're in 2026. If you look at the some of the Y2Q clocks, which say April 14th, 2030 is the estimated time for a fault-tolerant perfect quantum computer. And what's the implications of that? You get a fault-tolerant quantum computer, a perfect quantum computer that can actually break RSA 2048. It can break ECC, just like we talked about on our first episode. And so really not that far away, but organizations take time. And digital transformations took anywhere from 2 to 10 years. And so I would say to you that the big issue that is happening today is the speed at which the technology is developing and the slow pace at which we're, number one, organizations are adopting, and number two, the pace of controls. So globally, controls, regulations are falling behind the technology consistently. And so, some people consider artificial intelligence a bit of the Wild West. Quantum is certainly in that space as well.
Google Quantum AI suggested that Bitcoin's elliptic curve, well, it's not just Bitcoin, I mean, everybody uses it. Cryptography could fall to under 500,000 physical qubits, essentially a 20-fold cut from prior estimates. How
Mhm.
seriously should the Bitcoin community take that number? And I guess any other corporation that security relies on elliptic curve cryptography.
Yeah, we're seeing some 10x reductions in the number of qubits required in order to solve these challenges. And so the implications are vast. However, what we can't forget is a cryptographic layer. So if you're a Bitcoin operator, you would be looking at layering in post-quantum cryptography on your platform. So instead of just simply, and this is what Google and Amazon and IBM and all the large companies are doing, they're saying to themselves, if we're going to be attacked by a quantum computer, we need to have post-quantum cryptography. So it's shield, sword, whatever the layer is. So a Bitcoin platform isn't going to simply, say, well, we'll stay exposed to a quantum computer. They'll be looking for multiple kinds of protection, whether it's PQC, post-quantum cryptography, or maybe quantum key distribution, which protects your pipeline of communication. So yes, those reductions to scale on qubits are happening, but the organizations really do need to look at their protection.
Dr. Is it Michelle Mosca has
Yeah,
floated
Michele Mosca.
Michele, right? A 1 in 7 chance that public key crypto breaks by 2026, while others say decades. How do you reason about a timeline with that much disagreement?
Yeah, and I have that conversation all the time with organizations. And we kind of migrate to more of a roadmap concept, Sonny, where we start to think about, okay, 7 or 1 year, that really shouldn't be your first question. Your first question is, what are you doing to prepare? Are you actually putting people in place? Are you actually putting aside the investment funds for your IT budget? We just talked about the possible timelines, but it's so key for a CIO or a CISO to be thinking about the roadmap, whether it's finding some credible vendors or it is putting people in place inside your organization. And I know that's probably, a little bit more mundane in terms of an answer, but it's critical that organizations start to think about that today. And, for some organizations, it might also almost be too late.
Too late. Oh wow. Okay. That's
So, you may think, oh, I can just buy that software off the shelf and integrate it into my operation. But, that doesn't even start to think about your inventory. What assets are you trying to protect first? What really needs that level of protection? What investment costs is that going to mean across our organization? And a whole series of other questions. We have in 2026 more pundits talking about quantum and security and more conferences talking about quantum and security than I've ever seen.
it's literally one of the biggest topics in Bitcoin right now and in AI, right? So,
Yep.
I think a lot about Brian this machine economy. I don't know; those two words keep coming back. And quantum threatens or presents opportunities essentially to the machine economy in this like ginormous way, right? I mean,
Yep.
computing is at the heart of all of it. So, can you walk us through this like harvest now, decrypt later? Like, well, why is the quantum threat to encrypted data already kind of like a present tense problem?
It is. I mean, we already know that bad actors are harvesting companies' data, and they're doing it because they can get access to it. Their challenge is they're unable to decrypt that data. And so what they're doing is storing that information for later when a quantum computer becomes available to them, and then they'll be able to decrypt it. Now, let's say that happens 20 years in the future. Maybe that data is not so relevant any longer and not so prioritized. But if it happens within, let's say, a 7-year period where people's policies say 7 years data is very relevant, it could be social security or social insurance numbers. It could be some banking data, and whether you're an insurance company or a bank or a healthcare company, and that data has been taken and placed somewhere in a holding pattern until you get a quantum computer, that's a very big risk. But it's not just a risk; it's happening today, and we know it's happening today. So the only implications is we haven't seen, this make the news is because they haven't been able to decrypt it.
And Bitcoin's exposure is concentrated in addresses with revealed public keys and reused addresses. So, what would a real attack sequence look like, and what's genuinely at risk versus overstated?
Um, so here's what I think is at risk. If Bitcoin platforms, much like any other, aren't preparing today. So if they are, if that data has already been harvested, um, and they aren't shifting how that data is being allocated inside the platform, um, after they've included a quantum layer of protection, then it remains exposed. So they need to do those two things. They need to shift what the ledger looks like because they have to assume that it's already gone. And then they have to create a protection layer around that data so that future attacks are just impossible.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder is, could the quantum threat actually make Bitcoin stronger by forcing kind of a disciplined migration to post-quantum signatures, right?
Yep.
Is pressure a feature here as opposed to a bug?
Yeah, I don't think it's black and white because I don't think every platform, every organization is going to take the same approach. And I think that creates its own set of risks. So transparency from those platforms is also going to be important. So, if you're making an investment and you know that it has protective layer of post-quantum cryptography, would you be more interested in investing in that environment or buying those coins?
Hmm. Interesting. So if you were advising, let's say, the Bitcoin developer community and by the way, I have interviewed the gentleman who's authored the BIP for quantum resistance Bitcoin, right? And on kind of on a quantum migration roadmap, what would your first three moves be, and the hardest, you could say, non-technical obstacle?
Um, so let me get the second question first. And the hardest obstacle that was non-technical was exactly the same issue with artificial intelligence, and that's people, communication, leadership. We went through at least 2 or 3 AI winters before we got to the current generation. And what was the reason for that? It wasn't necessarily the technology. A lot of it came down to people in communication bringing their projects together with the investment that they were getting allocated, and they just couldn't bring it over the finish line. So that's what I constantly see today, where you've got lots of people with great ideas that can't execute and bring it across the finish line. Whether that's because they don't understand the competitive environment, or some other reason. And so maybe you can reiterate what your first part of that question was.
Oh no, I was just saying is that like if you were advising the developer community, and by the way, I probably wouldn't be hitting you up with so many Bitcoin questions if the United States government wasn't thinking about putting it on their reserve, and the most successful stock or public companies like MicroStrategy, weren't crushing it, and BlackRocks of the world weren't adopting it, right? Like now it's not like this funny money
Yep.
magical thing. I think it's becoming more accepted, and therefore, and I do truly believe that quantum, both for AI and Bitcoin, just keeps coming up over and over again. So yeah, my question was, if you're advising the Bitcoin developer community on a kind of a post quantum migration, what would your first three moves be, and kind of what's the hardest non-technical obstacle, which I think you addressed already, the last one?
Yeah. So I guess one thing I would say is um, the best advice for anybody on the consumer side, including Bitcoin platforms and organizations, is around prioritizing your inventory and your assets. So which assets do you have absolutely must be protected. And if you say everything, you're not going to be able to do it. You must have a sequential pattern for protecting your assets. So maybe inside an organization, it's your customer data. Maybe it's certain ledgers. Maybe your company payroll is a little farther down the list. Maybe your banking information is it. So if it's everything, you've got a real challenge because your IT team is going to have to deal with everything all at once. The second thing is community. If you are not watching what's happening in the rest of the community all the time, you not only don't see the risks, but you don't see all that best practice activity going on. So how many Bitcoin platforms are there? How many people are actually looking at what the other platforms are doing? And then the last thing is especially for the US, I would consider them one of the top three most advanced countries in the world around quantum initiatives. They have all sorts of resources. So if those platforms are not tapping those resources today to be able to understand what funding is available, what expert resources are available, that would be a shortcoming. There's the US, for example, the National Quantum Initiative, national strategies, IPOs that are going on, the huge community of quantum vendors. There's so much opportunity to connect with each one of those.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So can you zoom out? I mean, to the like essentially the convergence of this show is built on, which is, where does quantum sit in the Bitcoin AI robotics stack, and does it accelerate or complicate a machine economy where agents transact?
So the way I like to think about it, Sonny, is that um, quantum is not meant to replace classical systems. Quantum is meant to handle the most complex, intractable problems. So if there's a problem that you have today that couldn't be solved in 10,000 years even with a supercomputer, then that fits into the quantum space. Because remember, a quantum computer is not operating in a linear basis. It's operating in a parallel basis. You're looking at the example I've used many times where you have a robot at the beginning of a maze and it takes one step forward, hits a wall, steps back, and that it will continue trying to make it through the maze, one step forward, one step back. Whereas in a quantum environment, you're looking at all routes at the same time. And so by virtue of taking that methodology, you've got much greater opportunity, but you're not going to use that for your payroll. You're not going to use that for some of your operations. And you need to consistently continue to use an effective classical computing system.
Where would one use it?
So, for example, if you're looking at large molecules, that's a very different thing to combine large molecules and understand the output from those. Also, a large city, if you're trying to optimize optimize traffic in a large city, sure, you have certain factors like sensors and cars running around and traffic lights and, pedestrians and those kind of things. But then there are going to be those additional factors that you just can't bring in to really get a real life view. So traffic optimization is a great opportunity to use a quantum computer. Portfolio optimization, we also talked about. So there are some very strong material science. If you want to combine the breadth of various different atoms and find out what you can get out of the periodic table, that would take no supercomputer could ever do that. So how do you combine elements in a virtual space and get an accurate output? You really have to use a quantum computer to get advanced science that.
So
So
molecules, solving molecules means what to my mom listening? Longevity, you live longer, happier lives, I guess. The traffic
yeah.
example means what? Less miserable lives in traffic. And I mean, these are things that will materially, obviously make our lives better and longer. So
Yeah.
really exciting. But I think I interrupted you, Brian. You were going to say something else. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. So, if you think about the average life cycle of drug development, it can be up to 12 years from initial concept to the time it gets on the shelf. AI has helped reduce that to a certain extent. But if you're really looking to find new drugs that combine more different types of elements on the periodic table, then you really need a quantum computer to come up with those, not necessarily, faster, but you couldn't use today's supercomputers to do it. It's just impossible. So you might want to think of drug development. If you are looking to create a new type of shield for rockets going to Mars, stainless steel is, currently optimal, but maybe you want to come up with something new, that combines different elements. There's another great example. From a traffic perspective, if you live where I live in Toronto, you know that getting anywhere on Highway 401 during rush hour is next to impossible. And any given time, there can be an accident and different flows. But if you can optimize that, rather than just simply saying we need more roads, that can be a huge budget saving for any given city. So we're seeing those kind of difficult problems falling into the quantum sphere.
You push quantum readiness, right, over quantum building. So for a kind of a mid-sized company with no physicists on staff, like what does a
Yeah.
credible first, 90 days look like?
Yeah, and so I actually do this. I did a readiness workshop at Lakehead University along with my TED Talk, and that was on an individual basis. But from a company's perspective, really what they have to do is identify what their business problems are. It's easy to jump into a new technology and say, this is interesting, we should explore it. Um, for any company in the go forward space, they need quantum from a cryptography risk perspective. Everybody will need to know that their software solutions are protected. But when you start thinking about their other problems, they have to think about, do they have a business problem that is so significantly complex that they need a quantum computer? Not everybody will. We aren't simply talking about quantum as the next generation. It's simply a hybrid capability. And so, for those companies who I talk to and walk through roadmaps, find somebody inside your organization who's willing to do some research and do that sort of understanding of what your business problems are and whether a quantum computer or sensor or quantum communication capability can help your business. And that's where you start. And really, as a person who was a banker who moved into AI, who's now moved into quantum, quite often I'm self-taught. And a really interested CTO or even a CEO can start to think about using YouTube or using some free resources just to start down that journey.
You use Y2Q, years to quantum threat as kind of
Right.
a planning anchor. How should a CISO, or like you said, a CTO or founder, or a board actually put a number on that and budget against it?
I love the fact that you brought up the board. Any board worth its salt today should be pressing the organization for some kind of quantum roadmap. If they're aware at all, they should be understanding that this organization has a significant gap if they don't know what they're doing in the next 3 years to solve for this problem. Because that really is kind of the timeline that we're talking about. And if they're waiting until the years to quantum, let's call it 2030 for argument's sake, if they're waiting until 2030 to solve for it, they're going to be too late. It takes too many years to integrate a new type of computing into an organization. So I love the fact that you brought up this board because I talk about that often. Boards are accountable and should be considered irresponsible if they're not having those conversations with the CEO of our organization saying, when are you going to present us with your quantum roadmap?
Love it, Brian. I didn't even realize, but wow, we're at the end of our time. We have so many people listening live right now. Thank you all. Brian, this is quickly becoming one of my favorite topics. And thank you so much for lending us your time. You're on TEDx. I can't wait till that comes out next week. Make sure you share it with us, and we'll retweet it out. And let's do this again whenever your schedule permits. I know you're a busy guy, but this is a lot of fun, and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you all. Until next time. Brian,
Thanks.
hang out for 1 second. Let me bring this